The moment that shattered 86 years of American energy dominance happened at precisely 2:31 p.m. Mexico City time, and it began with a single signature on a document that will redraw the global energy map forever. I was reviewing classified intelligence assessments when my source inside the State Department called with information that made my blood run cold. Mexican President López Obrador had just signed Decree 47-2024, officially terminating all foreign extraction agreements and reclaiming complete sovereign control over Mexican oil reserves. Not since Lázaro Cárdenas nationalized Mexico's oil industry in 1938 has such a seismic shift occurred in North American energy politics. But here's what makes this moment truly revolutionary. Mexico isn't acting alone. Intelligence sources confirm that this decision was coordinated with Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran as part of a broader strategy to fragment American energy security and end our ability to dictate global oil markets through proxy control. The document I obtained through intelligence contacts contains provisions that will terrify American energy strategists. Mexico is immediately transferring operational control of 43 major oil fields to a consortium led by China National Petroleum Corporation and Russia's Gazprom. These aren't symbolic partnerships. These are comprehensive extraction agreements that effectively remove Mexican oil from American influence for the next 50 years. Let me explain why this represents the most dangerous challenge to American energy security since the 1973 oil embargo, because the mainstream media is completely missing the strategic implications of what just occurred. Mexico supplies nearly 15% of American crude oil imports and controls critical refinery infrastructure that processes heavy crude for the entire American Gulf Coast. Without Mexican oil flowing through American-controlled networks, refineries from Texas to Louisiana face immediate supply shortages that could trigger fuel price spikes and industrial shutdowns across the American South. This isn't gradual economic pressure. This is immediate disruption of energy systems that power American manufacturing and transportation. The timing reveals sophisticated coordination that American intelligence completely failed to anticipate. Mexican officials had been conducting secret negotiations with Chinese energy companies for months while publicly maintaining commitments to existing American partnerships. Russian technical advisors had been quietly assessing Mexican extraction capabilities. Iranian petrochemical experts had been evaluating refinery modernization requirements. This represents what I call energy encirclement, a coordinated strategy by hostile powers to control oil resources that American planners assumed would remain accessible regardless of political changes in producing regions. Mexico has just demonstrated that this assumption was catastrophically wrong. The historical parallel is striking and should serve as a warning about what comes next. When Cardenas nationalized Mexican oil in 1938, American and British companies controlled over 70% of Mexican production through concession agreements that resembled colonial extraction more than sovereign partnerships. The nationalization triggered immediate sanctions and diplomatic isolation that lasted for decades. But Mexico survived that pressure and ultimately thrived under national control of oil resources. Today's Mexico is far stronger economically and has powerful allies that didn't exist in 1938. China needs Mexican oil to reduce dependence on Middle Eastern suppliers vulnerable to American naval interdiction. Russia requires Mexican partnerships to maintain global market share despite Western sanctions. The economic implications are already cascading through American energy markets in ways that reveal how dependent our system has become on Mexican resources. Futures contracts for West Texas Intermediate crude spiked immediately upon news of the decree. Refinery operators throughout the Gulf Coast region began emergency consultations about alternative suppliers that may not exist at current price levels. But here's what should terrify American strategic planners most about this development. The infrastructure that processes Mexican heavy crude cannot easily switch to alternative suppliers without massive investment and lengthy conversion periods that could take years to complete. American refineries were specifically designed to handle Mexican crude with sulfur content and viscosity characteristics that differ substantially from other suppliers. Saudi oil requires different processing equipment. Canadian tar sands need specialized refinement that many Gulf Coast facilities don't possess. Venezuelan heavy crude is ideal, but remains under sanctions that prevent American access. Mexico has effectively created a chokehold on American refinery operations that cannot be easily circumvented through market mechanisms or diplomatic pressure. This represents precisely the kind of asymmetric leverage that rising powers use against established hegemons when they cannot challenge American dominance directly. The geopolitical dimensions reveal coordination that extends far beyond bilateral Mexican-Chinese cooperation. Russian advisors have been training Mexican engineers on enhanced oil recovery techniques that could increase production capacity beyond current American consumption requirements. Iranian petrochemical specialists have been developing plans for Mexican refinery expansion that would enable direct sales to Asian markets. This isn't just about removing Mexican oil from American control. It's about building alternative energy networks that bypass American financial systems and reduce global dependence on dollar-denominated oil transactions. Every barrel of Mexican oil sold to China in yuan rather than dollars weakens the petrodollar system that has anchored American financial dominance since the 1970s. The immediate response from Washington has been predictably aggressive and strategically counterproductive. Threats of economic sanctions that could drive Mexico deeper into Chinese economic orbit. Diplomatic pressure that validates Mexican arguments about American interference in sovereign decisions. Legal challenges that ignore the fundamental principle of national resource sovereignty. American energy executives are privately acknowledging what government officials refuse to admit publicly. We lack the leverage to reverse Mexican nationalization without triggering broader confrontations that could destabilize the entire North American energy system. Military options against Mexico are obviously impossible given geographical proximity and economic integration. Economic sanctions would harm American interests more than Mexican ones, given our dependence on Mexican energy and agricultural imports. Diplomatic isolation is meaningless when Mexico has powerful allies eager to deepen energy partnerships. The alliance implications extend throughout the Western Hemisphere in ways that compound American strategic vulnerabilities. Other Latin American nations are watching Mexican success in challenging American energy dominance while calculating whether similar moves might serve their own interests. Brazil controls enormous offshore oil reserves that American companies have accessed through partnerships that assume continued Brazilian compliance with American preferences. Argentina possesses substantial shale oil deposits that could be developed through Chinese or Russian investment rather than American extraction. Venezuela obviously represents the largest oil reserves in the hemisphere, but remains under sanctions that prevent American access. If Mexico can successfully nationalize oil resources and transfer control to Chinese and Russian companies without facing devastating American retaliation, other Latin American nations may conclude that similar strategies could enhance their sovereign control over natural resources while reducing dependence on American markets. The technological dimensions reveal how completely the energy landscape has changed since Mexico's previous nationalization in 1938. Modern extraction techniques require sophisticated equipment and expertise that only major powers possess. China has developed advanced drilling technology that rivals American capabilities. Russia maintains some of the world's most experienced petroleum engineers. Mexico no longer needs American companies for technical expertise or capital investment. Chinese state-owned enterprises can provide funding for infrastructure development. Russian specialists can train Mexican engineers on enhanced recovery methods. Iranian petrochemical experts can modernize refinery operations to compete with American facilities. This technological independence eliminates the leverage that enabled American companies to maintain privileged access to Mexican resources, even when political relationships became strained. Mexico can now choose partners based on strategic rather than technical considerations. The financial implications reveal vulnerabilities in American energy planning that extend far beyond immediate supply disruptions. American oil companies have invested billions in Mexican extraction infrastructure that could be nationalized without compensation under international law precedents established by previous resource nationalizations. ExxonMobil alone has over $8 billion in Mexican assets that could be seized under the nationalization decree. Chevron operates critical pipeline infrastructure that connects Mexican oil fields to American refineries. ConocoPhillips maintains exploration agreements that assume continued access to Mexican territorial waters. These investments represent sunk costs that cannot be recovered through alternative deployment if Mexico maintains nationalization policies supported by Chinese and Russian partners. American energy companies face potential losses that could reshape corporate strategies throughout the sector. The precedent established by Mexico's successful energy nationalization will be studied and replicated by resource-rich nations worldwide who have grown frustrated with American economic domination and are seeking alternatives through partnerships with rising powers. Nigeria controls substantial oil reserves that American companies access through agreements that assume continued Nigerian cooperation with American strategic objectives. Kazakhstan possesses enormous energy resources that could be developed through Russian or Chinese investment rather than American partnerships. Iran obviously represents massive oil and gas reserves but remains under sanctions that prevent American access. The pattern emerging suggests that we are witnessing the beginning of systematic energy decoupling as resource-rich nations calculate that partnerships with China and Russia offer better terms than continued subordination to American energy corporations and strategic demands. Mexico's energy nationalization represents the first major crack in American energy dominance that has defined global markets since World War II. The assumption that friendly governments would maintain American corporate access to critical resources regardless of political changes has been shattered by Mexican willingness to transfer control to American adversaries. The broader implications extend beyond energy security to fundamental questions about American economic leverage and alliance reliability. If traditional partners like Mexico can successfully challenge American corporate interests without facing devastating retaliation, how reliable are American commitments to allies who face similar pressures from rising powers? The strategic environment has fundamentally changed in ways that cannot be reversed through traditional American approaches to energy diplomacy. Mexican success in transferring oil control to Chinese and Russian companies without facing catastrophic consequences will encourage similar actions by nations worldwide. American energy dominance, which seemed unshakable for 8 decades, has been successfully challenged through legal nationalization, supported by alternative partnerships that make American retaliation economically and politically problematic. The unipolar moment in global energy markets has ended. American companies can no longer assume automatic access to critical resources in friendly nations. The monopoly on energy infrastructure that enabled American economic leverage for generations has been broken through coordinated legal warfare rather than military confrontation. History will remember Mexico's oil nationalization as the moment when 86 years of American energy control ended not through revolution or war, but through sovereign decisions supported by rising powers that offer alternatives to American dominance. The message to resource-rich nations worldwide is clear. Alternatives to American energy partnerships exist and can be implemented without triggering devastating retaliation. The era of unchallenged American energy dominance is over, and the multipolar future has begun beneath our own soil.